Hello. Perfect, works. So I'm Reinhard Krickl, the Chief Executive of Phagenesis, and probably one of the few Europeans who made it to this conference here. I don't know if you were, but for us Europeans, we're not allowed to travel to the US right now, unless we actually get what's called a national interest exception, which basically means we have to demonstrate to the US authorities that we can make an impact on critical US infrastructure. So probably me being here is a proof that brings something of relevance to the US market because at least the US authorities allowed me to travel here. So what I'm talking about is how we drive ICU efficiency by getting patients out of the ICU quicker. So right away, things typically investors are interested in is, yes, we have already compelling clinical data. So 25 years of clinical research, more than 15 studies, 700 patients published in Lancet and so on and so forth. So yes, we have data. You can consider the regulatory stuff done because we already CE marked as a European company. We are commercial in Europe, but also we are an FDA breakthrough device, and we expect FDA de novo approval by the third quarter this year. We have proven how to earn money with it, of course, also very important. So we have shown that we can save money to the hospitals and payers by getting them out of the ICU quicker, reducing of lengths of stay. And we already by CMS have an improved NTAP reimbursement. So that's also, of course, then taking 2/3 of the device costs going ahead. We have our own space. What I'm saying that we create our own market. So we're providing something where there's no solution in the moment. So we're the first of its kind by treating dysphagia, as I come to that in a second. So we have a strong IP portfolio and other means to protect our market. And last but not least, we believe we have a very strong team. And being a European company in Manchester, United Kingdom, we have already a strong executive team here in the United States. So let me give you a little bit the problem. So what are we trying to solve, or what we know we're solving? So consider a patient on mechanical ventilation, and specifically the very critical ill ones who need to be on the ventilator for weeks and months. So they are typically tracheotomized, so a breathing tube is put surgically in place, and they're on the ventilator. At a certain stage, hopefully, they get off the vent. They get better, and you would think that's the time when they get out of the ICU and being discharged. Unfortunately, it's not the case because 70% of these patients will have developed dysphagia, in other words, they're drowning in their secretion. They can't actually be discharged because they are not at all stable. They don't have a safe airway. And there's yet another group of patients which are probably the more lucky ones in a way because they're still mechanically ventilated, but actually after a few days already, so not weeks and months, they actually are off the ventilator because they have improved and stable. So now the oral intubation tube can be extubated, an extubation attempt can be made. However, again, a large proportion of these patients are again drowning for their secretion because they have developed dysphagia during the mechanical ventilation. And that actually caused them, again, drowning the saliva or drowning in the saliva, becoming unstable, and then very likely they come into this route of actually having to be tracheotomized even. So reintubated tracheotomy in this vicious cycle. And that's where we intervene because we can drive patients out of the ICU faster by applying Phagenesis, our device, our new stimulated device, to accelerate safe decannulation for those decannulated or cannulated patients and reduce extubation risk. And so now you see the happy patients because now we get patients out of the ICU faster. That's why we actually have an impact on critical infrastructure in the US. How does it work? So we retrain the brain. So we allow that patients pick up the swallowing control within 3 days. And what's even more important, we are the first treatment ever applicable in the ICU. So the problem of dysphagia, that was well known, it's well diagnosed, but it's not something which could be solved in the moment. The cause could not be treated in the level of the ICU. That's something we can do, which never could be done before. The way we do it is we basically stimulated the pharynx with a neurostimulator, which is only be put in place for 3 days. And that way we trigger neuroplasticity and neoplastic auto recovery of the system to pick up that neurological swallowing control. So very quickly how this really works. So a patient gets a similar catheter-like a nasogastric feeding tube put in the nose, and then our proprietary electrodes touching the pharynx and the tip of the catheter going into the stomach, because you could also feed the patient to that system. Then that catheter is connected to a base station, as we call it, which is the stimulator box. And then we stimulate the patient for 3 consecutive days, but only for 10 minutes per day. So it's a very strong but very short impulse, basically, to trigger this neoplastic response. And it's very practical to be applied because this catheter can be placed in the patient while the patient is still orally intubated, while the patient is tracheotomized. It can be applied in the ICU setup, and that's what makes the magic. And the good thing is, after we have triggered the system, so that's the 3 days of retraining the brain, which we have demonstrated works so well, we remove the catheter, and that was it. And the patient actually is hopefully then with a safe airway and can be discharged of the ICU. I spoke about mechanical ventilated patient all the times because it's one of the most convincing health economic cases, obviously in the US, but elsewhere. But I want to make you aware that dysphagia as an issue is a much broader concept or a much broader challenge in the health industry because it's also related to CNS injury patients, so that's stroke patients, traumatic brain injury patients, without mechanical ventilation. So 50 to 70% of stroke patients develop dysphagia, something we have equally shown to treat. And also there's persistent dysphagia. Just basically want to let you know there's a much bigger area, but our focus is mechanical ventilated patients because of the really interesting business case. 2.5 million patients have dysphagia just in the US and Europe alone, so that's a huge market. We will have the razor blade model, so our catheter costs $4,500, which equals 1 day length of stay reduction in the ICU. So I told you already that's what's our aim, that's what we have shown to do, is that we get patients early out of the ICU, just 1 day earlier, buys the catheter. Every additional day basically is profit to the hospital. We show that we, between 4 to 8 days, can get these type of patients early out of the ICU. So it's actually a very nice health economic case. And while we're still in the moment are relatively small commercially, already at a 90% gross margin, so this will only get better. So let me summarize for your take-home message basically is, currently, patients are drowning in their secretions because of dysphagia, so the not ability to have not got a safe airway, which causes severe complication and prevents from ICU discharge. It's the current situation. The difference we're making, and that's what you should take home, is Phagenesis treats dysphagia, and it's the only treatment which can be applied at the level of the ICU. Wrap it up. So we are going to go into the US in Q3 because that's when we expect to have the de novo clearance in the US. We are currently raising a 25 million round, pretty far advanced, have a lead investor in terms, but still invite participation into the syndicate. That round will fund us for the years 21 to 22 and into 23. We already have established our strategic partnerships. So, the big guys are really interested in this product because they have the same call points in the ICU and also see really a good fit into the portfolio. And in 3 years, so we'll see what's going to bring the future, but it's easier than being with one of these big guys or also consider an IPO, as we really feel this is a good story to be sold to the public investors. Thank you for your attention.